Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She laughed when he grabbed her waist. Not a shy, nervous laugh. Not the kind you let slip when you're caught off guard. No, this one had a shape, a rhythm, a purpose. It cut through the noise of the ballroom like a blade, sharp enough that even the DJ paused for half a beat before pretending nothing happened. Her hand stayed on his forearm a moment too long, her smile a touch too bright. I'd seen that smile before, not on her, but on people who perform for an audience. She always said working as an event coordinator taught her to manage energy. I just never thought she'd try to manage mine. Her little circle watched. Some smirked into their drinks. Some tried to pretend they weren't staring. And him, Eric, the family's pet bartender, the guy who lived on late-night shots and half-finished dreams, he enjoyed every second. He curled that manicured hand around her waist like he finally earned something he'd been chasing for years. I didn't move, didn't blink. I just felt everything inside me go still, the way it does right before a storm reaches land. She expected the explosion. She wanted the scene, the shouting, the jealousy. She wanted to make me look small. But I just looked at her, then at him, then at her again. And I smiled. Quiet, level, almost bored. You can keep her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't give her the drama she was salivating for. I turned away before she even processed the words. I grabbed my jacket off the chair, the same chair where she dropped a little Target bag earlier, saying she bought herself a mood boost. I didn't bother looking inside. Whatever was in there wasn't meant for me anyway. Not anymore. I walked past the crowd, past the lights, past Eric's stunned grin. Outside, the night air was colder than I expected. Good. It kept my pulse steady. I got into my Chevy Tahoe, the one thing in my life that never asked me to perform, and drove off without checking the rearview mirror. What she didn't know was that I wasn't disappearing. I was stepping out of a room she'd already emptied long before tonight. I didn't drive far that night, just enough to let the noise of the ballroom fade into something I didn't have to hear anymore. The road was empty, the kind that lets you think without interruption, and the cabin of the Tahoe felt bigger than usual. Not like an escape. More like a place where I didn't have to explain myself. I pulled over near a quiet strip mall, killed the engine, and let the silence settle. That was when my phone lit up with messages I didn't open. I didn't need to. I already knew the pattern. Confusion, defensiveness, then the frantic need to pull me back into the orbit she controlled. I stepped out, breathing in the night air, and for the first time in months it felt like mine. My pulse slowed, not from calm, but from clarity. She thought I'd be pacing the parking lot, replaying the scene, drowning in the embarrassment she meant to create. But I wasn't embarrassed. I was done. There's a difference people like her never understand. Embarrassment chains you. Being done frees you. I walked down the sidewalk, passing a dim storefront. A poster for some new Hulu release flickered in the window, and it reminded me of all those nights when we'd sit on the couch pretending to watch something while she scrolled her phone, laughing at messages I wasn't supposed to see. Those quiet evenings were where the distance started long before tonight's performance. I just never admitted it out loud until now. My phone buzzed again, her name lighting up the screen, then disappearing. I let it. She'd panic soon enough, but her panic wasn't my problem anymore. Not tonight. I got back into the truck, hands steady on the wheel. The city lights blurred past as I drove, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of trying to hold something together by myself. There was a strange peace in the space she'd tried to fill with noise, a calm she never understood. And as I reached the edge of town, I realized the truth. I wasn't running from her. I was finally stepping back into my own life. I parked behind the house, letting the engine fade into the kind of silence that forces the truth to surface. The porch light was still on, the one she insisted we keep for warmth, though the warmth in our place had been gone long before tonight. I didn't go inside right away. I just sat there, knowing the moment I crossed that doorframe, I'd see exactly what she'd been hiding for months. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It was confirmation waiting to be recognized. When I finally walked in, the living room looked too neat. Not lived-in neat, but staged neat, the way she prepped spaces when clients were about to arrive. Her jacket was tossed over the chair, and next to it sat a small bag from Victoria's Secret she'd tried to hide behind a pillow last week. She said it was a return. I knew better. People don't buy lace and satin when their partner is asleep on the couch 2 rooms away. They buy it when someone else is keeping them awake. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Missed calls, messages, even a handful of voicemails. I didn't play a single one. Instead, I opened the shared tablet she always left by the fruit bowl. She used it to manage schedules, client lists, invoices, and apparently conversations she didn't think I'd ever see. Her mistake wasn't arrogance. It was predictability. She got sloppy because she believed I wouldn't look. The messages were all there. Threads with Eric, the bartender she swore was like a brother, the guy she laughed with over Chick-fil-A lunches when she claimed she was too busy for me. Late-night photos of outfits she asked for feedback on. Plans for events she invited him to before telling me she needed space. Nothing explosive. Nothing explicit. Just a slow, careful erosion of boundaries until there was nothing left between them she considered sacred. I scrolled in silence, not angry, not shocked, just aware. This wasn't passion. This was convenience. She wanted attention, validation, electricity. And she didn't care where it came from, as long as it wasn't from the man who kept the roof above her head from collapsing. I closed the tablet, set it back exactly where it had been, and walked out. I didn't need confrontation. I didn't need answers. I'd seen enough to understand one thing clearly. She had been drifting for months, but tonight was the first time she realized I could drift too, just not toward her. I didn't leave town. That would have looked like running, and nothing in me was running anymore. I drove to the edge of the highway and pulled into a quiet Taco Bell, the kind that stays open late for people who need a place to breathe without being watched. I ordered something small, sat in a corner booth, and let the warmth of the food settle me. It was the first real meal I'd had in hours, but more than that, it was the first moment in a long time where I wasn't waiting for her mood to decide how my night would go. My phone kept buzzing, lighting up the table like an alarm. I flipped it face down and let it die out. Whatever she was saying, whatever explanation she was spiraling toward, it wasn't for me anymore. Not tonight. Not after the way she let him touch her waist like she belonged to everyone but herself. I wasn't going to give her the power to drag me back into a performance I never auditioned for. I finished eating, wiped my hands, and sat there in the quiet. There was a Hulu ad playing on the mounted TV by the counter, some couple laughing on a couch like their world was simple. The kind of scene she used to pretend we had. The kind I used to believe we could get back to if I carried a little more weight for both of us. I watched the screen without really seeing it, letting the false brightness wash over the truth settling in my chest. On the drive home, the truck felt different. Not heavier or lighter, just mine. The road stretched ahead, calm, steady, unbothered. And when I pulled into our driveway, I didn't go inside. Not yet. I stood there in the dark, listening to the distant hum of traffic, letting the space between us widen without effort. She wanted a reaction, a scene, a crack in my composure she could point to later and say, "See? You overreacted." But all she had now was silence. A silence she couldn't manage, control, or dress up with event lights. I wasn't gone. I wasn't hiding. I was simply stepping out of reach, and she hadn't realized yet that this was the one thing she had no script for. I didn't plan to see her cousin that night. It wasn't a scheme, not a countermove, not some childish attempt to make anyone jealous. It just happened because when I finally walked back into the house, the lights were off, and the silence felt staged, like she wanted me to believe she'd been sitting there waiting, replaying the scene. But her car wasn't in the driveway. She was out somewhere spinning a story she hadn't finished writing yet, and I wasn't interested in being part of the ending. I grabbed a clean shirt, washed my face, and stepped back outside. The night air felt different than before, clearer somehow, and as I stood there, I noticed a familiar sedan pull up across the street. It was her cousin, Jenna. She'd texted earlier in the week asking if everything was okay, saying she'd seen things she didn't want to assume out loud. I never responded. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I wasn't ready to let anyone witness the truth I was still piecing together. When she stepped out of the car, she didn't smile the way my wife did, all practiced charm and social gloss. Jenna looked at me with something grounded, something human. She asked if I was all right, but not in a way that demanded an explanation. More like she already knew the shape of what had happened. She'd always been the quiet one at family gatherings, the one who stayed on the edges while my wife performed for the crowd. Maybe that's why her presence didn't feel like noise. We ended up driving for a while, No destination, no script. She noticed I hadn't eaten much earlier and offered to stop somewhere, but the Taco Bell meal still sat warm enough in my stomach that I shook my head. She didn't push. She just let me breathe, let me exist without expectation. That alone felt like a shift I hadn't realized I needed. As we drove past the glow of a late-night Target sign, she pointed it out with a small laugh, saying it was funny how some people bought things to fill emptiness they wouldn't admit. She didn't mean it as a jab, but it landed anyway. Not painfully, honestly. I wasn't replacing my wife. I wasn't proving anything. I was simply choosing space that didn't demand I shrink to fit. And for the first time in a long time, the road ahead didn't feel heavy. I didn't go home that night. Not because I was avoiding her, but because there was nothing to return to. The house had become a stage, and every room carried the echo of someone trying too hard to look fulfilled. Jenna and I ended up at a quiet overlook outside town, the kind of place teenagers used to sneak off to before the city built brighter distractions. We sat on the hood of the truck, not touching, not leaning in, just sharing the kind of silence that doesn't demand anything from either person. My phone buzzed again, this time with notifications stacked on top of each other, her name filling the screen until it dimmed from inactivity. I finally powered it off. Jenna didn't ask about it, didn't even glance at the device. She just said she remembered how calm I used to be at family cookouts, fixing broken chairs and rewiring outlets while my wife drifted from conversation to conversation like she was auditioning for attention. I didn't respond, but she didn't need me to. Some truths don't require commentary. Back in town, her circle was already talking. Not because of anything I'd done, but because she'd returned to the ballroom alone, flustered, trying too hard to laugh off a moment no one had actually asked about. According to one of my friends who happened to be there, people exchanged looks when she said I'd stepped out to cool down. They'd seen her let Eric pull her close. They'd seen my reaction, or rather, the lack of one. And the room shifted in a way she couldn't control. The next morning, as the sun climbed over the roofs, I finally drove Jenna home. She thanked me for the company, not flirtatious, not hesitant, just sincere. Before she got out, she pointed to the small bag from Chick-fil-A sitting in her lap, leftovers from her shift the day before. She handed it to me, saying I might need something warm before dealing with the day ahead. It was a simple gesture, but somehow it hit deeper than anything my wife had offered in months. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house looked smaller, or maybe I'd just grown past the version of myself who kept shrinking to fit inside it. I wasn't returning to her. I was returning to the truth. The house was quiet when I walked in, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that hangs in the air when someone's been pacing, rehearsing, unraveling. Her keys were on the counter, her jacket draped over a chair, and the living room looked like she'd tried to reset the place into something welcoming. A candle burned down to a puddle of wax, and the TV was frozen on a paused Hulu menu, as if she'd tried to distract herself and couldn't sit still long enough to choose anything. She wasn't in the living room, not in the kitchen either. I found her in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with her phone in both hands like it was the last rope holding her together. She didn't look up, but her shoulders tensed when she heard me. She'd been crying, quietly, the way people cry when they're ashamed to admit they lost control of the story. I didn't say anything. I didn't walk toward her. I didn't close the door or soften my steps. I just leaned against the frame and let her sit in the silence she'd been running from all night. She finally spoke, but her words weren't directed at me. More like she was talking to the room, trying to convince herself she still had some grip on the situation. She said she didn't mean anything by it, that people were watching, that I misunderstood. But I'd heard those lines before, delivered with the same shaky confidence event coordinators use when a party goes off script. I stayed quiet. She kept talking. The more she rambled, the more she realized my silence wasn't something she could manage. When she finally looked up at me, she saw it. The distance. Not anger, not disappointment. Just absence. The version of me she'd always expected to jump, react, fix, argue was gone. Her eyes flicked toward the closet, where that Victoria's Secret bag was shoved behind a stack of blankets. She knew what I'd seen. Or maybe she didn't know exactly, but she knew enough to understand the ground had shifted. I walked past her, grabbed a change of clothes, and left the room without closing the door. She stayed frozen on the bed, realizing that for the first time in our marriage, She wasn't the one slipping away, and I wasn't coming closer. She came looking for me later that evening, her footsteps cautious, like she was entering a room she no longer had permission to walk into. I was in the garage, sitting on a small workbench, tightening a loose bolt on one of the shelves. I wasn't fixing anything important, just keeping my hands busy while my mind stayed steady. The air smelled like motor oil and dust, familiar, grounding. The kind of place where her social charm and rehearsed expressions held no influence. She stood at the doorway, waiting for me to acknowledge her. I didn't. I kept working, the metallic click of the wrench filling the space between us. She finally stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper as she said she didn't recognize the man who walked out last night. She meant it as a nudge, a soft accusation wrapped in concern. But it only showed how little she'd actually seen of me these last few years. I didn't turn. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't offer confrontation either. Her breath wavered when she realized I wasn't going to help her steer the moment. She started talking again, faster this time, saying she felt out of control, that she never meant to hurt me, that things got misinterpreted. I let her words fall into the concrete floor like loose screws, noisy, scattered, ultimately irrelevant. The only time I looked at her was when she mentioned Eric, her voice cracking as she said she didn't want him. Not the way he wanted her. She admitted he'd been pushing boundaries, but insisted she never crossed a line. I had seen enough to know that wasn't true. Emotional lines count too, especially the ones people think no one notices. Behind her, the faint glow from the kitchen TV flickered through the doorway. A paused Hulu screen she must have left running while waiting for me to come talk first. The same pattern as always. She creates the storm, then waits for me to clean up the aftermath. I set the wrench down slowly. Not dramatically, not symbolically, just enough for the sound to stop. Then I walked past her without a word, leaving her alone in the quiet she had spent years drowning out. For the first time, she didn't follow. The shift wasn't loud. It didn't happen in one dramatic scene or some explosive argument. It happened quietly, over the next few days, in the way people looked at her and then at me. Word travels fast in families, even faster in social circles built on curated images and whispered commentary. I didn't say a single thing to anyone, but apparently I didn't have to. People had seen enough at that ballroom. Her pressed against Eric, her laughter too sharp, his hand too familiar. They'd seen my reaction too, or rather the lack of one. And silence, when it comes from a man who rarely raises his voice, carries farther than any accusation. She tried to regain control. She tried to host a small gathering 2 days later, the kind of thing she usually orchestrated to show everyone she had everything under control. But this time, the room didn't tilt in her favor. Friends asked where I was, their faces tightening a little when she claimed I was busy. One of my cousins apparently said, "You really thought no one would notice?" Not cruelly, just plainly. She left the gathering early, her smile brittle, the same way event lights flicker before burning out. When she came home, she found me in the kitchen eating leftovers Jenna had dropped off earlier. A simple gesture she didn't try to hide. My wife froze in the doorway, seeing something she'd never expected. A version of me who wasn't waiting for her, chasing her, or orbiting whatever emotion she projected that day. She tried to talk again, softer this time, but her voice kept breaking. She said the house felt off, that she couldn't sleep, that every room felt like I'd taken something with me when I stepped back. The truth was simpler. She was finally sitting in the emptiness she'd created long before I ever left the ballroom. On the counter behind her was a Target receipt from earlier that afternoon, another attempt to buy something comforting. A candle, a throw blanket, small distractions. But the air still felt cold, untouched. That night, when she lay awake beside me, I listened to her breathing falter, realizing she finally understood what had changed. I wasn't hers to manage anymore. She finally broke on a Sunday morning, the kind of morning when the house used to smell like coffee and quiet routines. This time, it smelled like nothing. She came into the kitchen wearing a robe she'd bought recently, the one she claimed was just comfortable. Though I'd seen the matching item tucked in that Victoria's Secret bag, she thought I never noticed. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale, and for the first time in years, she looked younger than her age. Not from beauty, but from fear. She asked if we could talk. Not demand, not dramatics, not the defensive monologue she usually hid behind. Just a small question. I nodded, not because I owed her anything, but because silence doesn't always need to be cruel to be effective. She sat across from me, fingers trembling against her mug, and said she didn't understand how everything shifted so fast. She said she kept replaying that moment at the ballroom, trying to figure out when she lost control of the night, of the narrative, of me. I still didn't speak. I wasn't withholding words. I simply didn't have any to give her that would change what she already knew. She admitted she'd been using distractions, lunches, events, the constant noise of her job, to avoid facing the distance between us. She said she'd been scrolling Hulu late at night, just to fill the silence I used to soften for her. She said she never thought I would step back. Not really. Not in a way she could feel. When she finally asked if I was leaving, the question didn't sound like a threat or a test. It sounded like surrender. I stood, pushed my chair back gently, and walked to the doorway. She followed me with her eyes, gripping her mug like it was the last thing keeping her grounded. I turned just enough for her to see my face, calm and steady, the way it had been since the night everything changed. I told her the truth, the one line she'd never expected to hear from the man she thought she understood. I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. Then I walked out into the morning light, leaving her in the kind of silence no amount of Target candles could ever fill. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.